Hey everybody, this is Meyer, and in this video what I'm going to do is talk about the first thing you need to produce music, which is MIDI keyboards and controllers. Like the last thing, which were an audio interface, you technically don't need this for producing music, but it makes your life a heck of a lot easier, especially if you only plan on sequencing, or you plan on sequencing at all. So what are MIDI keyboards and controllers? What do they do? And what are some recommendations when picking one out? That's what we're going to talk about today. So a MIDI controller actually has a couple of different features, and different ones can have different strengths in different areas depending on what you're looking for. Perhaps the most obvious thing is it sends MIDI or note data to your digital audio workstation, hence the name MIDI controller, which gives you a way to actually play melodies. So a lot of these MIDI controllers look like virtual piano keyboards, and the reason for this is that's exactly what they are. They allow you to play the sounds or synthesizers that are in your computer or externally through this interface that then triggers the notes in your digital audio workstation or sequencer. Even if you're not a piano player, a MIDI controller allows you to audition melodies and play different sounds without having to necessarily draw them in with the mouse and keyboard, and I can't stress this enough. At the time, I wasn't that great of a keyboardist. I had taken some piano lessons when I started producing, but even getting a small MIDI keyboard really sped up my workflow because it really helped me to play those melodies more physically as opposed to having to know music theory and pencil in each note depending on what scale and chord progression I had chosen. A lot of these MIDI controllers also include things like pitch wheels and mod wheels, which are other types of MIDI controls which can send information to your digital audio workstation to change the sound. So the pitch wheel allows you to bend the pitch of the sound, and the modulation wheel can be assigned to a lot of different things, which just changes the sound in general and keeps your songs from sounding too static. And certain digital audio workstations will offer what they call virtual MIDI controllers or musical typing, which allows you to play these melodies just with your typing keyboard and by typing the different letters of the alphabet. But of course, it's a lot easier when you actually have a physical keyboard there to play these melodies and audition different sounds. Now, here are a couple things to consider when buying a MIDI controller. First is going to be the price. The cheapest ones you can find for under $50, but easily they can get over $500, if not over thousands of dollars, depending on what features they have. The other thing to keep in mind if you're actually trying to buy a piano keyboard MIDI controller, while there are also pad keyboard MIDI controllers, which basically give you pads if you're sequencing drums or doing any sort of beat production, but a lot of times people also like getting a MIDI keyboard that has keys because that allows you to play the piano notes as you're producing, which I'll talk a little bit more about why that's important in a little bit. But the thing to keep in mind is how many keys do you want and what are you trying to record? I like MIDI keyboards that are 49 or 61 keys, but some people like them smaller so they can travel with them, and other people like a full 88 keys so they get the whole range of the piano there. The other thing, do you want pitch wheel and mod wheels? Generally, you're going to pay a little bit of extra for pitch wheel or modulation wheels, but they can be really helpful if you're deciding on recording synth parts. The other thing to consider is your MIDI controller velocity sensitive, meaning can it actually track how hard you press each key when the note is triggered, which is also MIDI information. Other features to look for if you're interested are something like aftertouch, which can track how hard you're pressing the key as you're holding the note down. So this is a little different than velocity. Velocity is just the initial hardness of the note that's being pressed. Just like a piano key, the harder you press a piano note, the louder the sound's going to be. Whereas aftertouch actually tracks how hard you're pressing the key while the note is being held down. So it's not just the initial attack, it's actually as you're pressing down the key, if you're adding more or less pressure while you're holding down the key, it'll actually change the sound. Only some MIDI controllers can respond to what's called aftertouch control. The other thing to consider is, does it have transport controls? Can you play, pause, loop, or rewind the track from your controller itself? So if you look here in the middle, this Oxygen 49 Mark II has the transport controls right underneath the 8 knobs, whereas on the right, Akai MPK Mini does not. And last but not least, does it have any other controls like drum pads, faders, and knobs that you can assign to different parameters within your digital audio workstation for more hands-on control? And is that something you want, or is it just going to take up more space in your studio and not actually be used for anything? Now, the reason I mention this, and the reason that most MIDI keyboards out there, the idea of a MIDI keyboard looking like a piano, is because within all your digital audio workstations, with maybe the exception of trackers like Renoise, represent note data or MIDI data within what's called a piano roll. So if you look here, and on the bottom left is FL Studio, in the bottom middle, that's Studio One, on the bottom right, that's Ableton Live, then you have Ohm Studio, and on the top right, you have Logic. In all the main digital audio workstations out there, your notes and your melodies are represented in terms of piano keys. So having a MIDI keyboard that represents these piano keys or represents how these melodies are going to be recorded and played back makes your production process a lot easier and smoother. Pretty much being essential to being a producer or a sequencer is getting familiar with the piano keyboard. It is imperative that you understand your way around a keyboard and how to play melodies on a keyboard, which is why the MIDI keyboard is such an important or integral part of the production process. If you're already a piano player or you've taken some piano lessons, you're ahead of the game. And the reason for this is pianos represent music theory in a very visual way. You can visualize scales and see how these notes are laid out over time and over frequency or pitch. And that's why a lot of seasoned producers out there actually take piano lessons. I know guys like big DJs like Armin van Buuren. He has piano lessons every day to expand his keyboard skills because it makes him a better producer, and it allows you to get that idea from your brain out into your computer a lot faster by playing it rather than clicking and penciling in each note. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we'll talk about the fifth thing you need to produce music, VSTs and other plugins. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the Discord for some recommendations on MIDI controllers. See you guys.